on camera.
Well, sure.
Yeah,
I've got his first
Billy.
record.
Oh,
My
yeah?
kids got it all autographed and everything. My kids got it
Oh,
for him.
okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It was Bob Shedd and Van Vonk and what's her name? Richie's mother. And I all didn't do it. So I said, all right.
Okay. Now, do you still drive?
Yeah. My mother made it to 100, but she would have lasted longer. But my sister passed away, and then 2 days later, my mother did from a heart break.
Well, I understand. It's in the paper. You probably don't know. I know that the couple sold their home and moved sometime in the last few months. The person who bought it said, this is Ken Bailey of Voorheesville, New York, being interviewed in his home in Voorheesville by Ken and June Hunter. Ken served in the U.S. Army from November 4th, 1942 to October 30th, 1945. This is May 9th, 2006 at 1:30 p.m.
This is a citation that specifies the award of the Bronze Star Medal issued from the headquarters of the 3rd Armored Division on August 1st of 1945. As announced in Section 6, General Orders Number 90, this headquarters on July 19, 1945, you have been awarded the Bronze Star Medal for meritorious service in support of combat operations against the enemy. The citation reads as follows: Tech 5, a corporal, Kenneth H. Bailey, Headquarters Troop, 4th Cavalry Group, Mechanized, for meritorious service in support of combat operations against the enemy in France, Belgium, and Germany from July 1st, 1944 to May 8th, 1945. During the Mortar counterattack, Tech 5 Bailey displayed the highest qualities of coolness and courage when, as driver of an armored car on liaison duty, with 2 battalions of infantry surrounded by the enemy, he braved small arms, mortar, and other fire to successfully extricate his car and its crew. As driver of the executive officer's armored car, and later as driver for the commanding officer, Bailey displayed the highest type of soldierly deportment and devotion to duty. The perfect condition of his arms, vehicle, and equipment were in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service. He entered military service from New York by command of Brigadier General Hickey.
Now, what is your full name, and when and where were you born?
My name is Kenneth H. Bailey. I was born in Albany, New York.
And when were you born?
February 2nd, 1922.
What did you do before you entered the service?
I was a mechanic at Orange Motor Company in Albany, Ford dealer.
And did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted.
And how did you feel when you got your draft notice?
Well, a little worried, but I went.
And I imagine your family,
Yeah, I was
were
just
they
married.
concerned?
I was married 6 weeks before I went away.
And where did you enlist, and where were you sent for basic training?
I enlisted, or was drafted into Albany, New York at the Armory, and then I went to Fort Meade, South Dakota in Black Hills, and that was in the 4th Cavalry.
Do you remember anything from your basic training, what it
Yes.
was like?
It was tough because Black Hills was very, very cold and snow. We had 12 weeks, and then we left there and went to the desert in California, and that was just the opposite. Real hot in the daytime, cold at night, and lots of sand and no water. And so we trained there until the war in Africa was over with, so we had to be shipped back to Texas. We went in Texas and had our training there, and we went to England and had our training for the invasion.
Could you tell us some kinds of the training that you had from basic and how it increased and got more intense?
Yeah. Well, when we first started, you had all basic of your arms and no driving or anything then. It was just your arms and all. And then when we went out in the range, it was cold and below zero, and they'd throw a little bit of snow or straw on the snow so that you could lay on that a little bit. And then they'd bring us our lunch out there, and it would be pork chops that were almost frozen. Then for dessert, it would be a slab of ice cream. You had to put that on your armpits to thaw it out so you could have a little dessert, you know. And so then when we went to the desert, it was just the opposite. We trained on all of our vehicles, and then we found out, at first I was in motorcycles, and motorcycles don't work in the sand. So then we switched over to all of our other vehicles. And so Texas was much better than what the desert was. And so then we got ready, and then we shipped over to England.
Now, had you ever been on a ship before?
Never was on a ship before.
And what was that
I can't
like?
swim either, so. The ship that we were on was a Highland Chieftain, and that was an English ship, and it was all with a merchant marine from England, and they were either kids 16 or under, or older men 40 and up that wasn't in the British Army. And we ate twice a day, and it took us, I think it was 14 days to get to England from New York. And you stood up to eat, and then to go to sleep at night, there was mats like you'd have in a gym in a high school, you know, and they would pull those out, and you'd lay in that, and then the next morning you'd pick them up and pile them up again, and that's the way it was.
Did you get seasick, or?
No, I was lucky. I didn't get seasick at all.
Did they
But
give
a
you
lot of
any?
them did.
Did they give you any kind of special duties on board the ship, mess or?
No, we had exercise, of course, and it was all blackout. You had double doors to go through, and to even see outside, you had to go through double doors, and you could see convoys. We were on a big convoy, and you could see over off the right or left side that you could see other ships, you know, but you didn't know what they were, if they were more like we were, or if they were the Navy or what have you, you know, escorting us across. So that was quite an experience just to get to Southampton.
How long did it take you to get across?
14 days. Yeah.
It's a lot. It was a lot slower back then than today.
Oh yes. Of course, they didn't go straight either. See, same way as going from Fort Meade, South Dakota, down to the desert in California. We went by way of Texas and crossed all around, you know, to get there, because they were afraid to leave you go straight. Something might have happened, you know.
So do you know what the routing was across the sea?
No, I can't tell you that. I don't know.
So then you landed in Southampton.
Southampton. Mhm.
And then what happened after you landed?
When we landed in Southampton, we went to our troop went to a small village named Singleton, which was 14 miles from Chichester, and not too far from Brighton. And we did all of our training there, got all of our vehicles waterproofed. We were 6 months there getting ready. And our vehicles had to be all waterproofed, and you had to keep going out into the water further and further to make sure that they were, you know, going to be all right in the water, and especially the carburetor and your exhaust. And then and
Now,
we
what
left,
kind of, what were you being trained for?
You trained so what you were going to do once you landed, and where you were going to go, and to the much, you know, as much
Well, I
as you could
mean,
find.
you were trained in vehicles
and landing
maintenance
of
and
it,
so
yes,
forth?
yeah, because we had all the other training back in either Texas or in the California desert.
Did you have any mixed training with troops from other nations?
No, only when we went in maneuvers. And the maneuvers were, we never did that in the Black Hills because we were by ourselves there with Cavalry. But in the desert, we did a lot with other outfits, you know. And we were lucky because we were mechanized, where when the infantry came through marching like that with no water. And one night they came through where our bivouac was, took all our water off of our lister bags off of the vehicles. So the next morning we got up, we had no water. So we had to take and drain they have like a roller on not an armored car, but a scout car has a roller on the front. And so like you would have on a lawn roller, and we would drain that out to make our coffee, rusty water. So that was almost as bad as the war.
What about training, some mixed training with British troops in England?
No, we never had that. No,
You were strictly on a base that
strictly,
was for
yeah.
American troops.
Yeah, and the cavalry, of course, was for more or less like it was in the old days. excuse me, got a frog in my throat. But the cavalry was to go see who it was, where they were, hold them until the rest of them came up, and then you go on over and get the next ones, you know.
Mm.
So that was more or less what we did.
And then where was your next?
The next we got landed on, we had to load up on an LST. And of course I was the first one off, so I was the last one on. So I backed my armored car on last, and because I had to be the first one off with the executive officer. So we landed Utah Beach, and we weren't the first ones there. We were, I think it was 7 days after D-Day. But two of our outfits landed on the two islands of Jersey and Guernsey. And they were there 4 hours before H hour, so they were the first ones to land on French soil. And so then when we came in, the ship came as far as it could and stopped when it hit the sand. And I'll always remember when they opened up the front of the LST, the lieutenant colonel and the chief officer from the petty officer from the Navy, they measured how much water was, and it was 13 feet. Well, I can't swim, so all I could think about, what am I going to do down here in the turret? All the rest of them could be up in the turret, I'm down here driving, you know. So an armored car is like a tank when it's got 6 wheels onto it instead of tracks.
And maybe you should tell what an LST is.
Landing ship tank.
Yep, he knows.
Oh.
And this was the Navy that took us, so that was wonderful. And we had a good meal before we landed, and that was ice cream also for our dessert. And we slept on bunks on each side of the, fold-up bunks on each side of the ship, and the vehicles were all in the middle of it. And so anyway, the colonel turns around and he says, well, we'll wait until the tide goes out. So we went off in 6 feet of water, so that was all right. I could hold the wheel straight and go, you know. But I was really afraid. And they had tractors alongside of you and Navy SEALs that would dive down and hook on a chain, pull you out in case it did stop. But we made it okay, so we got onto dry land. So.
Did you encounter any resistance landing then from the Germans?
When we landed, all of our parachutes, well, this is awful. Everybody with the parachutes that didn't land on ground, that was hung up in the trees and everything, and they shot them down up there, and they were hanging still yet. Nobody had taken them down when we came through. And that was real bad for the first thing that we could see, you know. And then as soon as we got out of Utah Beach, then that's when we started going towards St. Lo and Elsmere, Liege, and all those places. We were in combat then. And then we went up to Cherborg, and this is all in Normandy, hedgerows. And every time you parked in a hedgerow, you had to get your vehicle as close as you could to the hedgerow, and then you put a camouflage net over it so they couldn't see you. And then we had a funny thing every night. Bed Check Charlie would come over with like a little Piper Cub. It would be of our plane, but his, and nobody shot at him, and of course he didn't shoot. He was just reconnaissance. So that was quite an experience till we got up to Cherborg.
Now, what kind of resistance as you were advancing did you experience from the Germans?
At the beginning, it was really, really hard, and they had all kinds of, their planes and things were faster and better than ours, and a lot of the vehicles were better, their tanks and all. But then we caught up with them, and we were then more superior than they were. And something I never knew, but when a cow gets hit or something, it turns over on its back and its legs are up in the air, which I didn't know before. See all that. And my radio operator, he would get a couple eggs from some farmers' chickens, you know, and we'd have real fresh eggs once in a while. So that was good.
Did you cook them somehow?
Yeah, we had on the armored car, we had a crew of 5, including the officer, lieutenant colonel. And we had what they call it would be like a Bunsen burner or like a little Coleman stove, round container, and I used regular gas like you got for the vehicle, and so we could cook on that. And then we got potatoes. One night he got potatoes out of a farm and dug them up, and we had like fried potatoes, so that was pretty good too. So most of the time we had either K rations or later on we had what they call a 10-in-1, and that came like a little box with all the canned food into it, and made by Cracker Jacks and Beach Nut. And we were better off because there was only 5 of us, so they couldn't split a box up, so we got 10 in one instead of 5 in one, so that was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And then I used to take it was all like in little containers of tin containers. You open up with a pair of pliers, I did, and you put it in there. Before you opened it up, you put it in hot water and heated it, and then the bunion, instead of making soup out of the powder, I used to use that for my seasoning onto whatever we had, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that worked out all right.
Were there occasions when you had a good hot meal to have an opportunity from time to time to set up a kitchen?
Yeah, yeah. The kitchen came up to us, I would say, maybe every 10 days we'd be all right on that, until towards the end of the war, we were going too fast and they couldn't keep up with us. And we didn't have anything but gas and water delivered to us. So for 3 weeks we had just venison, which our mess sergeant went out and shot deer. We had, and black bread, some kind of black flour that the Germans had, and he made black bread out of that, and the venison. For 3 weeks we lived on that and coffee. So that was good too, because we were going real fast, you know, and going across Germany and France.
What about holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas? Did they pause? Were there any lulls on the battlefield where the Germans...
No. In the Christmas of '44 was very bad. That was during Battle of Bulge, more or less, and snow and everything else, and we had K rations for that, for Christmas that day. So that was about all there.
What about supplies? Were you always able to have supplies to you, or were there periods when you were worried that you wouldn't have the equipment you needed?
Those 3 weeks, we did not get any food. We just got our gas and our water, and we were really supplied with that. We never ran out of gas, we never ran out of water, which the Germans did. And they had to finally hook up horses and try to tow their vehicles, and you can't tow a truck or a tank with a horse, you know. And they'd have maybe 4, 5, 6 horses hooked onto one vehicle, and then they come down strafing it, and then they'd be laying all alongside the road, you know. It was really, that was a hard thing to see.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have occasions to meet with people? How was the feeling when they were liberated from the Germans?
The French were wonderful, and the Germans were better yet. And the Germans really appreciated us being there. And they were always out there to help you and to try to do the best they could, you know what I mean, without being jeopardized by the Germans themselves, the Nazis. And I don't know. Trying to think what else.
Now tell us about that mortar attack, the counterattack.
The Mortar counterattack. That was we were sent on myself, my crew, and a lieutenant colonel that was on liaison with 2 infantry battalions. And liaison is where you're. Well, you know what liaison is, where you're. So we were out there, and the enemy came all around us, and we're the only ones with a vehicle. Excuse me. And the infantry, of course, could lay down or walk or whatever, but we can't with a vehicle. It's a great big armored car. So finally, we were all ready to ditch it, and we were going to go with the infantry. So I seen a creek bed, and it was a dry creek bed, and there was no water into it. So getting down into it was easy. But so we went along the riverbed, creek bed there, and they were shooting over the top, so that because we're down lower, but now we can't get out. So we had to cut trees down and make like a little path and road up so that we could get the vehicle up out of there after we got away from them, you know. So I got back and I had to report to the colonel, and that was Colonel Tully at that time. And so I went in, they said the colonel's waiting to see you. And so I went in and reported to him. He says, I'm glad to see you're back. And I said, well, Colonel, we almost left the armored car there. And he said, well, if you had, and he always took his 2 fingers when he talked to you, and he said, if you had, I'd have sent you right back after it. Because that showed that the vehicle was more important than we were. You know? So then, right after Christmas of '44, he made general at I forget what outfit, 87th, I think it was, but it doesn't matter. So they were bringing up a new colonel, and he was the provost marshal of the Patton's Third Army. So Lieutenant Colonel Dunn, who I drove for, said, would you like to drive for him? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, I think you should drive for him. I said, well, I'll drive for him. If I don't like it, can I come back to you and drive the armored car for you? And he said, yes, you can. So I went, and they gave me the Jeep, fixed it all up for me, and so then I drove the Colonel as soon as he came. Colonel, he was commanding officer. I drove him to the end of the war. So, and
were there occasions when you might have seen real high-ranking officers there?
Yeah.
Any chance that Eisenhower may have come
he
through?
went by when we were in Aachen, Germany. We took Aachen twice. We were pushed out of Aachen, and then we retook it again. And the second time, we were in Aachen, which is a little city or town, whatever you want to call it, in Germany, and he rode by and waved to us all. So that was really good, you know, and built up your moral support, you know, to see him. And of course, Colonel Collins, or General Collins, we seen him all the time, and he was 7th Corps. And so he was very, very much like all the other officers. He was down and like a regular guy. They weren't, you know, superior to you. They thought of the men the same as they did their officers. Most of them were all West Point officers too. Yeah, so that was.
Were there opportunities when there were lulls in the fighting that you had a chance to get some time off?
Yeah, when we were in the Hurricane Forest, that was more or less by the Battle of the Bulge, just before the Battle of the Bulge, if I remember right. Anyway, that was a little slowdown, so we dug holes in the ground about 2 or 3 feet, and then we put wood logs up on top and made like half down on the ground, half up above, you know. And we also brought in a generator, so we had an electric light bulb in there, and that lasted about 2 weeks before the thing started to go again, you know. But that was a very bad part of the winter. Yeah.
Now, were you able to get mail or send mail out?
Mail, yeah. We had mail call at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And but sometimes it was 3 or 4 weeks behind before we actually got it, you know, or packages. And the faster you went, the more towards the end of the war, it was the slower the mail was because we were way ahead of the mail.
While you're on talking about mail, when you sent mail out yourself, did it have to be censored?
All censored. Yeah, one captain, he had to censor all of it, and that was his job. And so after a while, you got to. Because, for instance, my wife would say, I didn't get half the letter because it was half cut out, you know, because he had to sit there with a razor blade and cut all these names or words or whatever it was into it. So after a while, you said, well, we're not going to write about that anymore, so you just wrote a regular letter.
Sometimes make up stories to keep the people at home from worrying as much?
No, I don't think I did. You didn't have time to do that, you know, and you had a lot of V-mail, which was very quick, but of course, that, on this side, they didn't want to get a V-mail because it wasn't very much, but it was easier for you to write because a V-mail was just one piece of paper and then folded over and mailed, and but you couldn't get too much onto it, you know. But it worked out. You know.
And did you ever see any of the entertainers, such as
Yes,
the
I
Bad
did.
Hope?
Yeah, that was in the desert in California. We had what they call a desert bowl, which was more or less like a sand bowl, and Bob Hope came there, and 2 or 3 other ones, I can't think who they were, and then we went to Hollywood, and we were quite a long ways from Hollywood, but we were about 60 miles from San Bernardino in the desert, so we have to go by convoy with the trucks to San Bernardino, and then we get the electric train to go into Hollywood, California. And I was lucky because I was riding motorcycles then, so we had to escort the convoy. So 25% of guys could go every week, and that would take up the whole month. So 3 weeks I would ride motorcycle with a convoy to take them to San Bernardino, then I would stay there in the Air Force Base, and then they'd go on with electric train, and then we'd escort them back to the desert again. So that worked out good. And one time when I was in Hollywood, Betty Grable came, and Shirley Temple, and I won a war bond from Jan Clayton. She was a star of the musical Carousel. So that was right. So I sent that home to Florence, and So she had that for a long while. As a matter of fact, she's got the letter someplace she put away that they gave it to me, So,
Now we always hear that about the military being so strict with inspections and cleanliness and so forth. What was it like when you're actually out engaged in battle?
Nothing like that. The colonel, first the lieutenant colonel, who's I drove for first, he was just like a regular guy, and then the commanding officer was the same way. You had to be neat and you had to be clean and everything like that, and no scrubbiness. You had to wash and shave all the time and everything, and keep your hair clean, but not like we were when we were in Fort Meade in South Dakota, or when we were out in, well, the desert wasn't that bad either, or Texas it was again, but nothing like that. It was more or less, and you didn't have time, because it was long, busy hours, and I think the time passed faster that way too,
So, did you feel that you were safer being a driver for these people than many of the other soldiers?
Yes, I did in a way, but then also the colonel never had an escort. I was the only one with him, and we'd go back to 7th Corps headquarters or some other outfit, and there was a lot of responsibility, because you were the one he was the commanding officer, and you were responsible for him. And most of this was at night, and night driving it's all blackout, and you have a little bit of a square light on the front, which could see nothing, it wasn't even as good as a flashlight. So you had to watch out for landmines and everything else besides snipers. And my Jeep was hooked up, we had everything fixed onto it with a bar up in the front that would cut, sometimes they would put a cable across to get your head or neck off, and we had that so it would cut it first. And then we had a big German car seat in there for him, and a big bar up in the front, because he was also cavalry, and he was a horse cavalry before that, so he always wore his boots and breeches, and he always had his riding quirt with him, and he would stand up and hold on that bar, and then he'd direct you along with a quirt, just like he would on horseback. So that was a lot of
like he was a lookout watching for landmines and so forth?
And then and the armored car that was a lot harder to drive, because it was the motor's in the rear, but one nice thing about it was the motor, instead of the radiator with the air coming out of it, the hot air was coming back out to the rear, because the motor being in the rear. So everybody came to my car, because it ran all the time for a radio operator, and so they come up there to wash and shave, because it had the nice heat, at least down to your waist. From there on it was a little colder, but that was good.
So you'd have to have the car running though to heat it all up for the people.
Well, the armored car never shut off, because it had to we didn't have radios like they have today. The radios in those days, you had to cut the back of the Jeep out to even get it, and take the tire off the back and put it on the side, because the radio stuck out the back, and they were about 2 feet by 3 feet, and great big clumsy things, where today it would be about 4 or 5 inches, So there was a lot of difference.
Did you ever have an opportunity to hear news how things were going, especially back at home, or the Stars and Stripes from time to time?
Stars and Stripes we got before. You didn't get very much over when we were in combat. You didn't get very much Stars and Stripes. You never heard a radio. You didn't know what was going on, unless somebody told you. And I was more fortunate, because the colonel would tell me a lot of things where I didn't. Other people wouldn't know maybe. So that was.
Then would you tell the other people?
Then I would tell everybody else
what was going on.
And I still keep in contact with my radio operator. He lives in Whittier, California, and we get Christmas cards from him and everything. So he's doing pretty good yet. And he lost his wife too, like I did, and so we got a couple of things in common,
Have you seen him since you were discharged?
I haven't seen him since we were discharged, We were discharged in Fort Dix, New Jersey is where we got discharged. When we came home after the war, that's what I wanted to tell you too. The worst thing that I can remember after the war, which was yesterday, 61 years ago yesterday, going to the cemeteries and seeing all those crosses. And we had to go with the colonel, because he gave citations or made speeches, and all these cemeteries with all these white crosses in a row. I'll never forget them. And it was.
Was that in Europe that
Yeah,
you're
it's in-
talking about?
This is in France, you know, and they're all in France. And then over in England, I got to tell you about that too. We were in this little town, Singleton, and across the way from this, well, it was like a big, it wasn't a castle, but it was a big house that they took for the headquarters. And the guy was out front, and I was on guard duty at that time. And this woman that lived across the way was in a little thatched roof house, and she would bring you tea and crumpets out in the morning, early in the morning, which was nice of her, you know. And then another thing in Belgium, we got in Liege, Belgium, that was our first ice cream that we got. And then we're a little bit further into Belgium, and a woman comes and she gives us Belgian waffles. Well, I thought that was going to be great, but then she gave us hot milk with it, and that was terrible. Have you ever had hot milk all curdled and, oh dear, you know, it wasn't pasteurized or anything back then.
And you wanted to be polite.
Oh, I wanted to be polite, and you tried not to. The waffles were great, but you ate the waffles first, and I'm trying to. They should have been the opposite way, you know. So you didn't get to do that.
Did you eat the waffles plain, or did she have some
No, they were
syrup
plain because
in
she had
them?
to come out. I don't even know if they had syrup, you
Right.
know, available for them at that
Or
time.
jelly, or
You know.
well, they're good with chocolate melted
Yeah.
on them.
And one other thing I want to tell you about England when we were there. In England, that's why I think they inspired me so much, the English people, because they lived in blackout, and they, from 1939, you got to remember that theirs started a good many years for us. So all I can remember is blackout and the buzz bombs and the bombing, and every night you didn't know what it was going to be, a buzz bomb come on you or a bomb, you know. And I don't know if you know what a buzz bomb is, and they didn't have no computers to run a buzz bomb, so they put so much fuel into it, and that's when it landed. When it ran out of fuel, it had like a little gasoline engine, it sounded like a Maytag washing machine engine. And when that ran out of fuel, you know it was coming down when it stopped making any noise up there. So that was quite an experience in itself.
While you were in England, were there occasions when you were involved in bombings coming over, bombing runs from the Germans? What was that like?
All the time, every night, and the buzz bombs, you never knew when they were going to land or where they were going to go. And we were lucky because we were right down on the English Channel, so they usually went on further into London or Lancaster or all up those places, you know, where they knew that they were going to do more damage. So they went over our head, but the buzz bombs, you never knew when they were going to land. They might even land out in the water because didn't have enough fuel into them. They didn't know how much to mix into it, you know, how far to fly.
It must have caused a tremendous amount of anxiety.
Yeah, and a lot of damage. And like I say, the people that lived there went through an awful lot, and they were they'd give you anything and helped you all the time, and they were very nice to us. We lived in a Nissen hut when we were in England for the 6 months waiting for the invasion. And we had a stove, a potbelly stove on each end of the Nissen hut, and Bobby would come maybe once or twice a day, and on his bicycle. Of course, Bobbies don't use guns; they don't carry a gun.
Yeah, for the information of people who are not familiar, a bobby is the policeman.
He's a policeman, yeah, with their tall hats
In
and everything.
England.
Yeah, and riding a bicycle with a little bit of tires onto it. And he would come and see if we were all right, if we needed anything, and then it was really, you know,
Very
good.
cordial to you.
Very cordial people, you know.
How did you find the people in Belgium?
Belgium was very, very friendly. I got to Brussels and rode around the statue in Brussels in a circle there.
The big marketplace?
The marketplace. Got to Paris a couple times in Paris. Paris is very nice. And Cologne, Germany, Wiesbaden. We ended the war in the Harz Mountains, which is a little ways from Leipzig. And we had to meet the Russians. And the Russians were just the opposite. The Russians were, well, we should have went on through, but we didn't. But anyway, that's another story. The Russians, they wouldn't let our outfit be with, none of the Americans could stay with the Russians when they took over our territory. So all our outfit went back except for myself and the colonel and 2 or 3 other officers and drivers, what have you. And then we got all the information to them, and then they took over, and we had to go on back into France. And then our Colonel MacDonald, made general at the end of June, and so then we were sent to be, I had enough points, you had to go by points to be discharged. And I had, I think it was 105, but I'm not sure on that now. But anyway, I had enough that I wasn't going to go into the Pacific. I was going to be going home and be discharged. But we got there on Le Havre, and we were in what they call cigarette camps. They were named after cigarettes, Camel and Lucky Strike and what have you. And we waited and we waited. And the longshoremen in New York were on strike, so they wouldn't send any ships for us. So we had to wait and wait, and that's why it was way into the end of October before we got. So we came home on a Liberty ship. Now a Liberty ship, you can see the rivets. When you stand there, everything would move back and forth, the rivets, you know. And well, it was a lot better than the Highland Chieftain that we went over with, and we had 3 square meals a day. And a lot of people got sick of that because it was a small ship. And when you stood on the stairs to come down, sometimes the stairs would be the opposite way. It would tip right over, you know, and a lot of them got sick in that. But that only took us, I think it was 14 days to go over, but coming home was only 11 days, so it was 3 days. I guess we went straight instead of crisscrossing, so that must have been the reason why.
And I imagine the feeling was much happier.
Oh yeah, you knew where you were going. And then we went to Fort Dix and got discharged, and then they gave us enough money to get home on a train from there to Albany, and then I got a taxi from Albany out to the house. And I came about, I guess it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and my wife and we had a son by that time, and he was, they were living with my mother and father in Delmar. And I got up on the front steps, and front door opened, there was Florence, my wife. Never forget it.
Now,
Can you remember where you were when it was announced the war was over in Europe?
Yeah. We're just before we got to Leipzig. We're a few miles out of Leipzig, and that was the end. It was May the 8th, and I can't tell you if it was morning, noon, or night. And I can also tell you when the war started, when Pearl Harbor Day. My wife and I, we weren't even engaged, and we were riding around Cooperstown, where she came from, and about 11 o'clock that morning, they announced that FDR got on and announced at Pearl Harbor that the Japanese had bombed us. A lot of other things are hazy now. I'm getting older. I can't remember.
do you remember when you heard that news, how it affected you all? Or?
Yeah. We didn't know what was going to go, what was going to happen to you, and of course we were young then, you know. And I was 20 when I went in service, and I was 23 when I got out. And you didn't know what was going to be. First of all, I did something foolish. I didn't know that you couldn't get cars and convertibles or anything, you know. So my wife, I wrote a letter to her, and I said, I made it through the war. I said, I guess I'm coming home, so I'd like to have a convertible. Excuse me. So she had a convertible waiting for me when I got home.
Oh, what color was it?
But that was something. So
what color was it?
it was gray.
Oh,
Gray
gray.
with red wheels, yeah, black top, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, and so that was quite a homecoming.
Yeah.
'Cause,
Was it a
you know,
brand new one or a used?
No, geez, there wasn't
Couldn't
no brand
afford
new
a brand
ones.
new
No,
one.
before I went in service, we had to put the new cars away, getting ready for the new cars were all put in storage, what you could get. And Florence and I, we would drive, and then the owner of Orange Motors, Frank, he would have Florence drive his car, and then we would pick up the other cars, and then we took them to this garage and parked them. And then while we were going in service, as a lawyer or a doctor or whoever really needed a new car, he would be allotted one of those cars. And they did that until the first ones were 46 when we got home, was the 46s. And when they came in, I went back to Orange Mortar, as a matter of fact, after the war. And Mr. Tully that owned the place called me. They notified him ahead of time that I was being discharged. So he bugged me until I came in to see him. And I said, yeah, I'll come back. And I was going to come back January 1st, and he made me come back December 1st. So, of 45. So I only had a month home before I went back. So anyway, the 46 cars came in, and they had no bumpers onto them. So we had to put 2x6s and paint them silver on the front and back. And then we call up the people that bought them and said, your rear bumper's in or your front bumper's in. And then they would come and we'd bolt on the front bumper or rear bumper.
Now, going back, when you came home, were there people to greet you when your ship came in, like communities or anything?
Nobody.
Did that kind of let you down? Because some people had a lot of fanfare.
Nothing like it is today or nothing. You got off the ship and there was nobody there, and we went to Fort Dix, and then you left Fort Dix. I can't tell you how I got to the train. I can't remember right now. I guess the train was close by. And you got there and then got to Albany and just got a taxi like you would today, you know, and told them where I wanted to go, and that was it. And then there was never no parades or anything else that we had. And,
now, you mentioned one person, your radio man, you keep in contact with. Have you made any other people or been to reunions or anything?
I have Johnny, another fellow out in Port Washington, Long Island. He's from. Not now. He's in Kenneth, North Carolina. He lives now, but he was in Port Washington. And during the war, well, Johnny and I were overseas. Florence, my wife, and my sister Helen went down to see his family down to Port Washington. They took them all over, and they lived a little ways from where Perry Como, the singer, lived, and so they took them there to see his house and all. And then they came up to see my wife Florence and my sister Helen. So that was nice that they went back and forth. Then after the war, Johnny and his family came up to see us, and we went to see them. Not in Long Island. That was out in North Carolina then, down North Carolina by that time. So that was good too. And that's about the only two that I really have kept in contact with, you know. But we have what they call a 4th Cavalry Spur, which is a newspaper printed 4 times a year, and one of the daughters of one of the fellows that was in service, she prints it, and she lives in Gillette, Wyoming, and she does a very nice job onto it.
Now the big mystery on here that people wonder, pay. How did they hold all your pay till when you got discharged?
No, you were allotted, the way you did it, so much went to your family, like to Florence, and then when our son was born, so much more went to her, and then I kept, I think it was $20 that I kept, and they gave me $20 whenever they could catch up with us. We didn't get it every month, sometimes 2 months, you know, but you didn't need money anyway. So you would get that, and the rest of it would all be sent home, and she would get a check for the rest of it. And I got to tell you something about her. She worked all the way through. After Kenny was born, my mother took care of my son while Florence worked, and she saved all of the money that I sent home. She saved so that when I got discharged, that we could start building our first house in Delmore. And I thought that was something. So we had a down payment more or less to start building. And so that was...
So how old was your son before you saw him?
He was... I only had one I had one furlough. And he was about 2 or 3 months old, I think. And that was the only time I seen him. You know? So it's a long while ago.
Yeah, that must have been difficult to leave him, and
and so I missed when he was more or less growing up, and then he passed away when he was only 23.
Yeah,
so
I remember.
You know.
So do you feel that you missed out on a lot with that,
Well,
with your child?
At the time, when I first went in, I thought, you know, you missed out on all this other stuff, and then now I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think it was the best experience that I could have had, and you know, as long as I made it through and I was safe and everything, and I got home.
And how do you feel that experience influenced your life?
It made me stronger. It made me appreciate more. It made me know to do the things now instead of waiting. Don't say, well, I'm going to do it next week or I'm going to do it next year. Do it now, because you never know. Yeah.
And now, did you become a part of any of these military organizations or anything?
American Legion. I joined American Legion. I've been there quite a few years now. And my wife, she was in American Legion Auxiliary, and we had a lot of good parties there. And towards the end, of course, we haven't been able to go to anything, but that's good to stay in it. And I get the American Legion book, and she got the Auxiliary book, magazine it is. And you keep up with a lot of things that's the military is going on, you know. And then my granddaughter's she was in the Air Force for 12 years, and now she's in the Army Reserve, and she gets all the books, and so she brings them to me so I can reminisce, you know. Look at it.
Going back to recall, C rations and K rations were the way you received your food. Can you describe what was C rations, what was K rations, and did you ever have opportunities to get that great development from World War II, Spam?
Yeah, we had Spam, and I still eat Spam. I like Spam. We had Spam every which way, fried and baked and everything else, you know. But we were very lucky. We had very good cooks all the way through basic training. Even out in the desert, we had good. And the desert was very hard because we had no refrigerators, and there was no way to have a refrigerator in those days. So they dug a hole in the ground, and they took railroad ties, and they built it up, shored it up with that. Then they put a roof over it with railroad ties, and then they bring in ice. And for all the while I was in the desert, I never ate at the mess hall for lunch. You had, I forgot to tell you that. You had 3 hours for lunch, from 11 to 2, because you couldn't stand at 120, 125 degrees, just too hot, and you couldn't do anything. So as soon as the PX truck would come from Indio, they would come out with the ice and the ice cream. Well, nothing would last, so we were the first ones there, and that's what we had. Every day I have a pint of ice cream for my lunch, and because it'd be melted, if you waited, it'd be melted, and you couldn't eat it anyway, so that was my lunch out in the desert. Then we have big Lister bags in the center of, we had like rows of tents, and we took stones and we make like a sidewalk, a walkway like, and then we had the Lister bag in the middle, and that has all the connectors where 4 or 5 guys can get your water at the same time, you know. And the Lister bag evaporates and makes it cool. With the sun beating onto it, it would make it cool. So the water wasn't too bad. But the worst thing was in the desert was getting a shower. They load you in a truck, and we go to the Coxcomb Mountains, which is in back of us, and dust flying all over. So you take your shower up there where the shower's all set up. Then you get in the truck. By the time we get home, it was just as dirty as you went, you know. So it might just well not went. So that was funny.
What were the C rations? What were inside C rations and K rations?
K rations in a box like a Cracker Jack box. It's all sealed with wax, and it's got almost the same as a C ration. Only C ration's got a little bit more variety and a little bit more quantity to it. And there would be 4 cigarettes and a little bit of toilet paper, a little bit of a chocolate bar, and then you'd have 3 of them. There was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And say for breakfast, that was powdered eggs. And then, like I said before, you put it into the hot water to heat it, and then you peel it back. And the bread, it wasn't bread, it was some kind of a cracker, you know. And I didn't smoke, so I traded my cigarettes, my 4 cigarettes, for somebody's chocolate bar. You know, and the chocolate wasn't real chocolate. Like it's probably was real chocolate, but not like today. It wouldn't melt or anything, and it was hard. but we got by. Oh, and that's another thing. Coca-Cola came in a bottle. You know how the Coca-Cola shape is, and you got that rationed every 2 weeks. You get a bottle of Coke. That was even overseas, over in combat. Every once in a while, we get a bottle of Coke sent to us. It'd be a lot better if they had cans, but they didn't have cans then, so you had to watch the glass bottle. You know, so that was good, and.
Now, we know that you received some awards. You haven't mentioned.
Well, I don't mention things.
Well, that's an honor.
Well, you shouldn't be ashamed about these.
Yeah.
You did receive quite a few decorations there because you had served in Ardennes, Central Europe, Normandy, Northern France, the Rhineland, the Battle of St. Cloud, the Battle of the Bulge, Cherborg, the Hürtgen Forest, Harz Mountains, Liege, Luxembourg, Brussels, and in Paris. And during all that time, besides the Bronze Star, you received the American Service Medal, the European, African, Middle Eastern Service Medals with 5 battle stars, and on top of that, the Good Conduct Medal.
Yeah. I was very proud of them all, and the most important was the Bronze Star, because I never thought I'd ever get anything like that. So that made me feel real good.
What was it like when you left from Fort Dix to come home on the train? Were people friendly?
They were friendly, but they, I don't know, they didn't congratulate you. Now I have people on Memorial Day will come. One woman that's with my wife, she was with the Battle Breathers in St. Peter's. She'd come out to the house on Memorial Day and just to thank me. And you didn't get any of that before, you know. And that's only recently. And no, I don't think.
Have you ever marched in our local village parade?
In the parade down Memorial a couple of times, you know.
That's a unique parade we have here because just about everybody in town participates in it, and you see them coming and going, and then coming back again.
Yeah, and then I have a lot of good memories of a lot of bad times, but a lot of good times too. That's why you have to look at it. You know.
And when the war ended and you came home, you say you then went back to work soon after, within a month or so, and you went back to Orange Motors?
I got home. I was discharged on October 30th, and I think it was November 1st or 2nd. I forget. Just must have been the 1st. And so I'm home about a week, and Mr. Tui calls up on the phone, and he says, "You are home?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I got a notice from the government saying you're going to be home." So he says, "When are you coming back?" I said, "Mr. Tui, I just got back." And he says, "Well, I want you." He said, "At least come and have dinner with me." So I said, "Well, I'll do that." So I went in and met him and had lunch with him. And I said, "I'll be back right after the first year, 2nd. And he said, no, he says, "I need you now." He says, "You got to come in December 1st. So he talked me into it, so I went in December 1st. So I was home a month, and I went back to work.
And that's where
Been
you
there ever
work.
since.
Right. How old is Orange Motors now, do you know?
90 years, October 13th of this year, it'll be 90 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Been there many
Yeah.
years. And they sell mainly Ford cars, don't they?
Ford, yeah, they sell Ford cars, and now Mazda, which is half Ford anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up with 46 years there. I started off as a mechanic, and then I went assistant service manager, and then I made service manager. And then my oldest boy passed away, and I stayed another year as service manager, and they said, "You're under too much stress, we're going to put you out in sales." Well, I thought, geez, here's another complete different career, you know. So I said, all right, and I didn't want to leave the service department, but I did. And I went out in sales, and I was there about 2.5, 3 years, and they made me sales manager. I said, talk about stress, here I am right back into it again, you know. So I was sales manager, and so that was like 2 different careers, being in the service department and being in sales. And then when I finally ended, I was part-time as, well, no more nights, that was it. No more nights, no more Saturdays. And I finished up as a salesman, no more nights, no more Saturdays. So that made it a little bit easier. I did that after I was 60 years old, and I retired when I was 65.
Hmm. And did you find being in the service, working with vehicles, that somewhat helped you to do a better job at the...
Well, I didn't do it. All you did in service, all I did was maintenance work. I didn't do all the other that I was doing before or after. But it gave you a better look out on life and better work habits, I would say. And you know, you don't go in and punch a time clock at 8 o'clock. You go in before, and you don't go out by 5. You go home after 5. You know, or something like that. So I guess that was a better thing.
Okay, well, we thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us.
I thank you both.